Welcome to Catastrophe. This is a podcast that takes you to the front lines of New York City's cat crisis. We're going to talk to rescuers who tell us what's going on the ground. This podcast is produced by New York City Cat Rescuer Alliance, which is a group of rescuers advocating for city-funded rescue resources for rescuers, including spay-neuter services. My name is Jonlyn Freeman, and I'm going to introduce you to our guests. Julie Flanagan from Washington Heights Cat Colony, and Denice Lauffer. Okay, great. I'm going to let you both talk a little bit about yourselves and what you do. Maybe start with you, Julie.
Okay, hi. Hello, everybody. I'm Julie Flanagan. I have been working with Washington Heights Cat Rescue Group for 8 years. My friend Sherry Lawrence started the organization with Trish Bogle and Ola Ahmed, and they started it 15 years ago. So it's actually been there for years, which is very good in the cat rescue world. I was living in Hell's Kitchen, actually. I had no idea that there was a cat problem in New York, and then went to Washington Heights, and I was like, what are all these cats doing running around underneath cars and behind buildings? I was really shocked about it. So I was very happy to get involved. I started first doing the foster and adoption posting on Pet Finder and on the website, and then gradually over time became the head of operations. So trying to manage the trap neutral release and all the rest of it. So I'm very happy to be here today.
Well, thank you. And Denice, tell us a little bit about you and what you're doing.
Well, I started, same thing. I'm from New Jersey. I was rescuing as a kid, just picking up the strays in the neighborhood. But when I moved to Washington Heights, I lived next to one of the notorious dumping grounds for fighter pit bulls. So I started with dogs. I'm bringing in, they just dumped them, rehab them. A lot of them were injured. And then as the dogs stopped getting dumped, the cat population exploded where I am. And I just started rescuing the cats and bringing them in, doing it all pretty much by myself for years.
And are you also in Washington Heights?
I'm in Washington.
Tell us what's been going on and how this summer is different from other summers, or what changed after pandemic for rescuers.
Denice, do you want to tell about the situation with the fire and the
So we've had several incidents. Like before the pandemic, we were able to get spots, to get them neutered. They were sparse, but we were able to get them. During the pandemic, because of the lottery, I was able to get 10 spots at a time. So actually during the pandemic for me, it was incredibly productive. I wasn't working and I was getting spots. So I was able to do a lot of rescuing. Then after the pandemic, when the lottery stopped, that's when we ran into problems because we can't get spots anymore. But for example, and I'm not the only one, there were other people clearly rescuing. There was one woman in particular who brought in, I was initially told she had 20 and they needed help because she was struggling, and it ended up being closer to 120. I was trying to get help from anyone. No one would listen. And finally she got frustrated, and unfortunately there was a fire in the apartment, and that's when we all scrambled. And I took a few, I know the ACC was involved. There were just so many agencies involved, but no one could handle this amount at once. And it was winter. So the windows, because of the fire, the windows were broken out. They were covered with wood. So there's no heat. So we had to scramble to get them. And it was definitely a situation that.
Now, when you talk about lottery, are you talking about ASPCA
Yes.
spay neuter spots?
So the spots are never up to they're just not there. But we did have trucks. The APCA calls them transport vans. And if I wasn't able to get on this month, then well, maybe I'll get on next month, and we could secure the cats. And we were able to get, especially with what we're doing, if you have like pregnant cats or injured cats, we get to bump the line. But it's incredibly difficult right now to get spots as opposed to before the pandemic.
Yeah, and I have a similar story in that before the pandemic, we could get spots, but the problem always was that you could never do effective TNR. You were always just trying to do the desperate cases. So you couldn't go in and do like a whole building or behind, because, there's so many cats behind buildings and stuff that you couldn't, because there was no spot. There was like one van with 30 spots or 45, and then you've got 30 rescue groups trying to get those few spots. It's hilarious, really, when you think of it. I mean, it is just so inadequate for what we needed. Since the summer, well, firstly, the main thing we've been dealing with, and Denice is in the same boat, is dumped cats. so many people are dumping their cats, they can't afford to get them fixed. And then it falls on us and individuals who have no money and are actually going without food to feed cats in our neighborhood as well. And then you're trying to get spots. You can't get any at all. You can't get any adoptions done because nobody's adopting. So it felt like we were in the middle of the Pacific Ocean without any wind and the boat would not move and we were desperate. It's starting to slightly shift, but still no spots. It's word of mouth. Who's got a spot? Who's somebody else got a spot? And then you're rushing at 6 o'clock in the morning to get one cat from one place. So you can, the effort and time involved to get 1 or 2 spots. It's actually the dedication of rescuers that amaze me. With so little resources, all the effort that has to go in for just a few to not really be as effective as we could be if we had a proper program.
A lot of these colonies, we're looking at 30, 40 per colony. And somebody said that there was a cat over here that was injured. I walk into the back alley and there's 30 that need assistance immediately and we're not getting the spots. So we end up paying out of pocket. I mean, I can't tell you how much money I've paid out of pocket going to, the animal medical center, the local vets, they don't give the discounts that we need. So yeah, it's a really bad situation.
I mean, we're at a point where it seems like a municipal responsibility is being taken on by private individuals, right? I mean, there are more city resources dedicated to a bag of trash than there are dedicated to a cat, an abandoned cat, right?
Or rodent removal. They're more concerned about rodent removal than they are about saving these animals. And it's like, we can work together. We're one. Agreed.
The cats didn't ask to be born here. They don't have that rough and ready New York thing. I want to say to everybody that has a cat in their home, once upon a time, it was probably somewhere outside. It was the lucky one that was rescued. So every time you look at your cat, remind yourself there's probably 30 cats out there that didn't get rescued because all these people adopt from ASPCA, ACC, all those cats come from these neighborhoods that are underfunded and have nothing. It's just, I always want to remind that they came from somewhere. It's just that the others didn't get rescued. All those other poor little ones outside that have nobody who cares about them, except us.
Right. Yeah, this is a human caused problem. Cats are not native to North America. So they're going to procreate in ways that don't live in a natural ecosystem. There has to be some human interference into this problem that was human caused in order to resolve this. So spay-neuter is how you do that. Maybe we could talk a little bit about how the city could help rescuers or what rescuers need or what you'd like to see change so that rescuers can work in an infrastructure where they have the resources they need.
I would like to see that the city actually ran their own spay-neuter program of some sort. That I feel ACC is very underfunded and doesn't have the ability to do more, and they should have. I think it would make such a difference. And we want to live in a city that cares and cares about the people and the animals. It affects everybody. I think the city could do more. I think they could fund proper spay-neuter and also no-cost spay-neuter for people who can't afford to get it done. And they're the ones that dump their cats, and we're the ones that have to pick up the pieces.
I agree. I agree. It's 100%.
Yeah, I mean, one rescuer we talked to, Rose Martin, mentioned the relationship between neglected cat populations and property values. So it would be maybe a natural solution to suggest that property taxes could go to pay for spay-neuter services. There's so many different ways that we could figure out. One thing that we've suggested is you take ACC budget, which ACC is a privately run shelter that is funded by New York City primarily. So it is not actually a true city service. It's an outsourced service. But the city budget's almost $18 million a year to ACC. And that is not even close to what ACC needs to be like a funded, adequate shelter system. We saw that it closed for intake this year. I don't even think it's reopened yet. So that's just an indication of the crisis that we're in. But let's say you were to double that budget and add another $18 million for a community cat program. I think we could solve this problem probably in 5 years. And the dividends that you would achieve by not having 10, 20 years of multiplying cat problem that the city has to deal with would probably be a cost savings. Sanitation budget is something like $1.8 8 billion or something. I mean, we're talking about 1% of some of these larger departmental budgets. That would be such an efficient use of money because you already have an all volunteer labor force working on the problem. It's almost like saying sanitation workers are volunteers and they just need trucks. Wouldn't that be the most efficient thing the city could spend their money on?
Yes.
So we need city funded spay neuter. I think there's a variety of other complicated issues rescuers are constantly dealing with. And when there's a crisis in the cat population, it has ripple effects to all of these other things: animal abuse, animal forwarding. When there are more and more uncared for cats, abandoned cats in the population, they become much more vulnerable to exposure, illness, injury on the street, and abuse from humans. Is that something that you're seeing as well increase?
Yeah, we had a situation a few weeks ago where somebody had given 2 kittens to somebody who was mentally ill, schizophrenic, and they threw them out of the 4th floor of a window into one of those air shafts between buildings. And the fire service on West 144th Street had to go and get these. They were very nice to do it. They can't always help. But the resources that went to doing that, and it's because cats are seen as expendable, and somebody just finds some kittens on the street, and the knock-on effect with that is now you've got a crisis. We've seen hoarding situations that are horrendous. And ACC don't have the ability to take all these cats in. Nobody can check up on anything. And just the ripple effect, it's just insane. I mean, that fire that Denice dealt with, the amount of work that went into that person should never have had that amount of cats. And they probably did think they were doing something good until it multiplied and multiplied. And there was another cat quarter situation in Queens last year that was just horrendous. And I know that the landlord of the building where it was happening, called all the city agencies. They called multiple begging for help, and nobody helped him. And it was just awful. And these cats suffered and were in such bad condition. And the person ended up being able to take them away. ACC had 10 days to pick them up. They just didn't pick them up. And then the woman drove away in a truck. We don't know where she is with them. Of the 150 cats that are unspayed, neutered, malnourished, sick, dying. And this is like a major city in the Western Hemisphere. I lived in London for many years. I didn't see anything like this. I have a friend in Barranquilla, Colombia, who told me about the excellent spay neutral programs they have there. I've got a friend actually who volunteers also with WaHi Cats and writes on social media. She now lives in Philadelphia. She's like, they have such good programs here. Why can't New York have anything like this? It's shameful, actually.
It's heartbreaking also, because the NYPD is supposed to be the one that is the go-to when you see hoarding situations, because it's neglect. There's all kinds of abuse or whatever going on. In my instance, with this woman that was hoarding the 120, I called 311. I called the ACC, the ASPCA. On the 311 report, it actually stated by the NYPD, not our jurisdiction. It is your jurisdiction. So, of course, this had gone on for months and months, and the woman got so frustrated that whether or not she lit that fire herself, we don't know, but that's certainly what it looked like. And it was avoidable if one of those city agencies would have stepped up and helped. And we've had hoarders too. We had a hoarder years ago on 190th Street. No idea how many cats she had in her apartment. She passed away, and those cats were then dumped. Again, same situation where no one would come. Those cats ended up being dumped in the local park. And then people like me, I had to go out. We estimated that there was 50, and it was a scramble to get them. Yeah, just living out. I mean, this is a park I rescue in constantly. And to walk into the park with a dog and have all of it's just approach me overnight. And again, that woman, in my opinion, the woman that did it should have been held accountable, because that's illegal. We could have done something instead of dumping.
Yeah, the legal question of hoarding seems to be problematic in New York City, at least. So, from what I understand, ASPCA can't do anything without the cooperation of the hoarder. And so you have someone who is already hoarding because they're probably mentally ill or some have other psychological problems. Does that seem like a likely person to cooperate with anyone? And so the laws are designed to see this individual as the owner of the cats and not to see the cats as having any protections or autonomy or value in and of themselves, protections from that hoarding situation. So it seems like maybe something in our legal system needs to change to give cats those protections. If ASPCA and NYPD can't go in and do anything because they don't have the legal mandate to do so. It does seem ridiculous that the neighbors of this woman who had, I think it was 150 cats in Queens in a bedroom apartment, years, that it's this was impacting the neighbors. It was creating quality of life issues for everyone around her, not to mention the danger to the cats living in those conditions. I know in Los Angeles, I think the law says you can't have more than 4 or 5 cats. The law is really designed to prevent hoarding situations. If you have that law in the books, then someone can act. There is an exemption for cat rescues. So if you're fostering, if you've got 2 cats and you're fostering 6 cats, you might have 8 cats in your home and you're working hard to keep them clean and sterile and you're trying to get them homes. But to have a law with some exceptions that is really designed to prevent hoarding situations, something that New York should be considering. What do you think about that?
100%. I mean, this is it for so many reasons. I mean, this is 2023. The fact that there isn't something in place when we know that a manifestation of mental illness will be hoarding, whether that be of materials or it is animals, it is a problem. And sometimes these people are very wily. That I think there's some rule where all you have to show is a bowl of water at the door. We have a duty to protect animals that are being abused. And for some people with mental illness, that's how they get some power trip as well. They don't mean to, but that's how it comes out. I mean, with the woman in Queens, she presented as somebody outside in the real world, as somebody who was a businesswoman who had her act together, but she was totally abusing those cats in her homes. And why would we allow that to happen? It just seems so archaic. Something should be done about it. I agree. I think a law where people can act on it, because we want to help these people too. You know, we understand that mental illness is an issue, but we can't have cats be the sacrifice to that, to do something.
Yeah, I was frustrated that ASPCA did crack down on a rescuer. I think it was Cats of Meow, which I know some rescuers are divided on this, but that was a rescue that I would argue was definitely doing more good than harm. Not every rescuer is perfect, but how were they able to go into that situation and say that's abuse? But they couldn't crack down on any of these other clearly abusive homes. So rescuers get targeted. Rescuers are required to spay and neuter animals they adopt out. They have standards they have to live up to that are beyond the average population. And these criteria are not applied to the population as a whole. So it seems like a double standard.
Which we're trying to help. It's like we get punished and we're all volunteers. We all do this out of the goodness of our heart. And to always be pushing against the system, it's very discouraging. And there's rescue burnout is a real thing. And having a city that does not acknowledge what we're dealing with in this supposed amazing New York City that this is going on. It's just.
Yeah. And like Denice was talking about, the hoarding situations, that's one person's decision to hoard cats becomes a community problem that can affect block after block once those cats are released out. I think every rescuers has dealt with one of those situations where, suddenly friendly cats are around and now you're having to round them up, get them spayed and neutered, figure out where they all are, figure out how wide scale is this? How far did they go?
Yep.
It's just become such a bigger problem to solve when that problem could have been contained by addressing that person with the cats in their apartment. Because you can't tell me someone with 50 cats in their home isn't being complained about by neighbors and friends and family.
With this particular incident, the ASPCA had gone into her apartment repeatedly and taken out the cats and left her with a couple. You can handle 2, you can handle 4. And then as the years go by, she collects more. And it was just an ongoing, she was on their radar. Why was she allowed to do this again and again? At one point she had both the dogs. They came in, whether she relinquished them or they took them, I'm not sure, but she was definitely on their radar already. And it just happened again.
Yeah. Speaking of legal frameworks, so rescuers are required to spay and neuter any animals they rescue and plan to adopt out. That's not a requirement for cats and dogs generally in the population. There's been some people arguing if we were to advocate for a mandate citywide that every cat and dog must be spayed and neutered. That would be punitive. What if people can't afford? But you can create a law that doesn't really have a punishment associated with it, but that gives rescuers some leverage when they're out in the community Because the burden of education is a heavy one. You have some people out there who are like, don't interfere with nature. I don't want to spay and neuter my cat. So the amount of education that rescuers have to work at to try to convince that person who may not ever be convinced, when they could just say, this is the law. I can help you comply with it.
Mhm.
What do you think about that?
It's a tough one. I mean, I'm not against mandating it, being boots on the ground, the things that we see. Yeah, I'm all for mandating. The education is a problem. For me in my neighborhood, it isn't just that one person that has, oh, I don't want my cat in nature and I don't want them neutered. God created them this way. I'm more concerned about the breeders who are deliberately letting them multiply and then just giving them out or selling them. And then that's to me the biggest problem with the pet population, not the cat population, the pet population. And I think that, yeah, we need to do something. I'm not against me at all, at all.
We suffer because we're the ones that have to pick up the pieces. They're not spay and neutering. And yet what's happening is that cats are marking, they're scratching, they're yowling, and then they throw them out. But then we have to pick up the pieces.
Out the window, yes.
They're throwing them. They're throwing them out because they can't afford. And I think it's the burden being on us to then go and pick up the pieces when there could be some law in place. I mean, they have the law in LA, don't they? Where like every
Yes.
code and stuff. Yeah. Why do we not have it in New York? It's crazy. Animal fighting, dog fighting and stuff. I mean, it's not just the cat population, but the dog population. And Denice, you've got more experience with that. But that kind of thing goes on. It's very upsetting.
And it's almost impossible to report. It's almost impossible to report because if you're dealing with a precinct that doesn't want the numbers, they don't want, oh, we got X amount of calls, or they have to answer on Comstat. Why are there so many fighting, people fighting rings or cop fighting rings? And no matter how many times you report it, until someone comes in and actually takes that report seriously, they just close out the reports. Gone.
Yeah.
Closed. And it happens hundreds of times before one complaint, actually. And then, yeah, we have some kind. But how many animals have died in the interim? How many
Yeah.
animals?
Also, you need proof as well for any animal abuses. I know the ASPC, I heard some statistic back in, I don't know what year it was, that they lost 90% of their animal abuse cases or something. I don't know if that's true. I mean, I'm throwing around a statistic, but it's so hard without actually video evidence to prove of animal abuse, which is another thing which seems crazy as well. But, you know, I don't know how true that is. But
Back to education in the neighborhoods. I know there are spots in the Bronx. I get phone calls about the Bronx. Oh, they're fighting them. They're fighting them. And people have the video, but they won't report it because they're afraid, because 9 times out of 10, it's a crowd of people that you really don't want to be on their backside. And they'll fight them right in the courtyard on the street. And nothing gets done. And it's, can I take down? No, you can't have the video because they're going to know from the angle that was my apartment. So I can't give you the video, but I'll show you the video. You tell them. And it's not effective. Not effective. And it happens over and over again.